should we have about a man nicknamed General Armageddon taking over Russia's war effort in Ukraine?
Well, he is as bad as any of the others they've tried so far. He's got an appalling track record. He was Spetsnaz originally in Afghanistan. He was in Chechnya, but he certainly rose to, I won't say infamy, through Western intelligence services by his actions in Syria. And right from the beginning of this conflict, I've been saying that Putin's going by the Syria playbook of trying to use a mixture of terror and destruction of civilian areas to drive people out to, in many ways, make it easier for his own troops to occupy. That has clearly backfired horribly. But this man has clearly been appointed because Putin believes he's ruthless enough to drive forward his agenda in Ukraine.
And Simon, what would be, his calling card? What would be his strategy? Would you say based on the history of his intervention in Syria, if that is his modus, as it were?
Well, he's going to certainly try and make the Ukrainian civilian population realize, as it were, there is a price to be paid for their military success at the moment around Kherson, Crimea, and of course over in the Donbass. It is the sort of tactic that the Germans used against the British, just indiscriminate bombing of civilian urban targets, trying to depopulate areas, use terror. It's not normally ultimately very effective. What it will mean is that we'll probably end up having to focus on providing the Ukrainians the capacity to defend their populated areas. And we know, again, from the Second World War, how much of a huge effort was really taken away from our offensive operations against the Germans, even after D-Day, in order to try and protect London.
General Armageddon's got a horrible ring to it. Where has it come from? What inspired that nickname?
Well, I think it's literally the sheer ruthlessness with which the Russians supported the Bashar Assad regime, alongside, of course, members of the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, Hezbollah, and various other militias. And it really was his capacity to absolutely have no regard whatsoever for the destruction of civilian areas or of the civilians within them.
And the goal with those attacks, is it just, and with that kind of strategy, is it just to fill the population with absolute terror and a sense of deep insecurity, not knowing where the next attack is going to come from? I mean, he's got a very questionable record on human rights, doesn't he? Particularly after what happened in Aleppo.
Oh, shocking! I mean, he's a Russian hard man. He's obviously an arch-nationalist. I suspect he believes the ideology that Putin's been putting around about reunifying mystical, historical Russia. And quite clearly, Putin believes he is the sort of person to prosecute this war with absolute ruthlessness. It is a mark of desperation. If you think back to the sort of scenarios we anticipated back in February and March, with after a few weeks of puppet government, Zelensky dead, Russian army, Ukrainian army collapse, etc. And here we are with the Russian army being exposed in a humiliating way, reputationally, and Putin and the hardline nationalists with him casting around for ways to try and salvage something from their appalling misadventure in Ukraine.
What's your sense of how the war is going?
Well, war is a political act, as Clausewitz always reminded us. Tactically and operationally, the Ukrainians are doing extremely well and the Russians are doing extremely badly. But strategically, Russia still has the capacity to keep escalating, be it energy, be it grain, be it disruption to global infrastructure, be it, God forbid, to even using tactical nuclear weapons or worse. And it's very difficult to know how a man like Putin either can or could be offered a chance to off-ramp, as it were, or de-escalate at the moment. And the Russian attempt is always to escalate first in order to try and create the conditions under which it can do something else somewhere. So Russia does have global reach just by the nature of global economics and global infrastructure, be it communications or pipelines or water lines or telecommunications lines. It is a worrying time, and the placing of this man in charge of the military operations just shows that Putin's going to double down on the brutality, which, as I say, is as bad as anything we've seen, certainly in Syria or the Second World War in some areas.